Hi, I'm indie fantasy author Melinda Kucsera, and today we're back with Fantasy Lore and More, and we are going to be talking to Peter Mooren, and we're going to be hearing about his book, The Return of Abaddon. So that sounds very interesting. So welcome, Peter.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. The opportunity to talk about the book. It hasn't gotten a lot of press, so to speak, yet. So always excited to talk about it.
Well, go ahead, tell us about it.
All right.
Don't keep us in suspense. Go on, give us the goods. What's it
All
about?
right. All right. So my original thought was it was a whole 7-book series, The Scars of Hiraeth, and I originally started outlining it a couple of years ago. Well, probably 3 years ago, really now. But it's sort of morphed quite a bit. But the whole beginning of the series was the very first thought I had, actually, which was.
Oh, I think Peter's frozen. So we're going to wait till the spell unlocks and releases him to hear some more about.
Oh, sorry about that.
That's okay. I just told, I just let listeners know that you've been
Sure.
put under a spell and we have to wait for you to unfreeze.
I know that's what happens with these fantasy magic books, I guess.
Yeah, his characters are maybe you didn't write the next book fast enough.
Yeah, maybe.
There's some magic flying around here. So
Maybe they did not like the twist in book 3, so I don't know. But anyway, so Wilder, the main character, I had this vision of him being involved in a helicopter crash and ends up being transported to another world. And so, and this was years ago that I kind of started that. So that's morphed a little bit as far as the details around it. But essentially, Wilder does do this. He's got some physical ailments, multiple sclerosis. Grew up as an only child and only had his mother looking after him. His father left on the day of his birth, and I go into some details later in the book on that. But essentially, he's taken a vacation in Hawaii, probably the last one, because his symptoms for multiple sclerosis are pretty bad. So it was a graduation present. So his mom takes him there. Something bad happens, and helicopter crash. And he ends up being pulled into another world and finds out he's got all kinds of interesting connections with his father, who's there in Hiraeth, and so he gets kind of thrown to the wolves a little bit, and has he's trying to deal with this major tragedy with his mom dying, watching that, and with the helicopter crash, and then he finds out he's connected to this other world, and he's supposedly the key to something. So
oh wow,
he's kind of dealing with all of this, trying to juggle all of this, and he's an 18-year-old kid. So
oh wow.
So yeah, that's the beginning of the book and how it starts, and Abaddon is the main character, again called The Return of Abaddon. So he had come to Hiraeth 2,000 years earlier, and was about ready to conquer their world when the Phoenixes, who are sort of reclusive, only come out periodically. They used to be a much bigger part of that world back then, but then they sort of joined the fight, banished him. Everyone thought he had died, and then they just went into hiding for quite a while. So this was 2,000 years ago. He comes back now to finish what he started, and obviously he's had 2,000 years to make plans to hopefully defeat the Phoenixes and conquer this world. So and Wilder's connected all throughout. So that's the premise of book 1. Is Wilder dives into this and eventually has to figure out what he wants to do, if he believes it, if he and he's got to go find some friends too.
Oh wow.
Very quickly. So yeah, that's book 1. Again, my very first entry into Spiffbo, and I had no clue about it, honestly. I was new to Twitter, I think, very early this year. I wasn't huge social media presence before that, so but figured since I'm writing books, I probably should. So I didn't really know much about it. And then ended up finding through the writing community. Yeah, found out about Mark's contest that he does every year, and decided, yeah, why not? Let's enter the book. And it's crazy how it all went down. I had no clue it was going to go, be filled up in 40 minutes or whatever it was.
Nobody did. Nobody did. I heard last year it took 8 hours. I don't know. This was
Yeah,
the first time I've ever participated in it, so I had no idea what to expect
yeah,
either.
yeah. And I didn't think anything of it. I mean, I had it, kind of marked to jump on at 8 and just enter it, not
Yep.
thinking much of it. And then I checked back later in the day, and the whole thing's like blown up, and it was pretty wild. But happy to be a part of it. There's a lot of really
Yeah.
good looking authors in the competition, and while I don't expect much, it's still awesome just meeting all the authors, and kind of just picking brains and getting feedback and all that kind of stuff is pretty cool.
Yeah, no, I wasn't expecting it to be like it is. I didn't expect it to fill up in 41 minutes either. I'm very glad that
No,
I submitted it at a few
right.
minutes after 8 and was one of the early ones.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So shall we meet Wilder?
Yeah, let's do it. Are you? Is this where we're looking for a little snippet from the book, or just talking
Yeah,
about him? Yeah.
definitely read. Yeah, if you want to, it would be great if you could read some of the book.
Okay.
Whatever you think is a good introduction to it, to the character, to the world, so we can sort of, because we've heard about Wilder and we've heard
Yeah.
about these phoenixes, so let's meet them. Let's hear
All
in their
right.
own words how they see the world and what's going on with them, and
All
then
right.
we'll definitely talk about the phoenixes. I got questions. That's top of my
Okay, we'll do.
list.
All right. Okay, so let me just read probably maybe the first two chapters.
Okay,
That'll
sure.
give us a good glimpse into it. The first chapter is pretty short, so
Okay.
all right. After parrying her strike, Wilder smiled. Glancing down at the sword in his hand, he felt invigorated. Not the time to dwell on romanticism. Wilder feinted to his left before stepping inside her reach. He overestimated and barreled into her, causing both to lose their balance. Wilder landed on top of her as they went down. He was about to apologize when a playful smile beamed up at him. Heat instantly rose in his cheeks, and his stomach knotted. The hammering in his chest taunted him, so he hugged his courage tightly and decided to go for it. Before he leaned in, Wilder remembered someone else had been watching from a distance. Dropping the notion of kissing her, he quickly stood and helped her up before reluctantly turning to look behind him. Leaning against a tall pillar of stone, the man grinned and said, "It sure looked like you set that whole thing up so you could end up on top of her." "I just misjudged my footing," Wilder replied, trying to refute the implication. The man's goading didn't let up. "The only thing you misjudged was me standing here. You wanted to kiss her, didn't you?" The white-hot flames licking at his face became too hot to ignore, and Wilder lost it. In the blink of an eye, he stood face to face with the man. They were both so shocked that Wilder jumped backward and fell to the ground while the man slammed against the rock behind him. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have begun our descent into Honolulu." The pilot's announcement pulled Wilder out of his dream. He opened his eyes halfway to peer out the small window beside him, but only saw glimmering sunlight reflecting off the vast blue ocean below. Feeling a hand resting on his, Wilder rolled his head toward the aisle. His mother greeted him with a loving smile, making the corners of his mouth curve upward ever so slightly. After a deep yawn that he thought might never end, Wilder placed his hand on hers, squeezing lightly. "We're almost there," his mother said. "Are you excited?" "I will be once I shake this grogginess. I'm definitely ready to get off this plane, though. That was the longest flight ever." His mother laughed. "I can't argue with you on that. I just hope we aren't too jet-lagged to enjoy our first day or two. Especially you. I'd hate for it to make your multiple sclerosis worse." "I probably shouldn't say this, but I don't think it can get much worse at this point," Wilder said with a thin smile. "No, you shouldn't. You know what the doctor said." "But I understand, given the progression of that damn disease over the last year." After watching him stare blankly ahead, slowly nodding, she said, "I know you didn't like the side effects, but you're sure you don't want to get back on prednisone? It helped with the pain." Wilder turned and locked eyes with his mother. "I'm sure. I hated how it made me feel, the jitters and insomnia. And that just led to a bunch of crazy mood swings. I didn't feel like myself. It was like someone else had taken control of me, so no, I'd much rather deal with the pain." It had been hard for her, particularly as a mother, to constantly balance the conflicting emotions. She was so proud of Wilder for his strength and courage to fight his MS head on. But she also struggled at times with the crushing sadness of knowing she'd eventually lose her son to the disease. Wilder stretched his arms and legs to get the blood flowing again. Without warning, a muscle spasm attacked his right leg. As he rubbed it, the sharp pain triggered the memory of his dream. "Are you okay?" his mother asked. "Yeah," he replied without looking at her. "Just thinking about a dream I had." "No, not that. I was talking about your muscle spasm," she said, tilting her head down on his leg when he turned toward her. Wilder grinned. "Oh, that. I'm fine. It didn't last long." "That's good," his mother sighed, softly rubbing his arm. "So what was your dream about?" "It's all pretty fuzzy now, or at least most of it anyway," he replied, facing forward again. "I was standing in a dirt field, no place I recognized, and I held something in my hand. I'm not sure what, though. Then someone behind me said something, so I turned. I can't picture them anymore, and I have no idea what they said." "Fascinating dream, I know," Wilder huffed, facing his mother. "Then all of a sudden I was standing right in front of that person. It's weird, though. I've had dreams that just sort of skip ahead, but this was different. I remember that part vividly. It was lucid. I felt it. I moved faster than humanly possible. I've had a lot of strange dreams before, but nothing that tangible." His mother smiled tenderly. "I think you're just missing being able to run so much that you're coming up with creative ways to move in your dreams." She nudged him thoughtfully. "You know, that would be pretty funny if there wasn't a lot of truth to that," Wilder replied before looking out the window to catch his first glimpse of the island below. When Wilder's mother surprised him with a Hawaiian vacation for his high school graduation present, and he saw their excursion itinerary, he went a little berserk at the thought of finally getting to fly in a helicopter. So his outright giddiness by the time they arrived at the Kauai heliport a few days later didn't exactly come as a great shock. "Please be careful," his mother said. "I don't want your excitement to aggravate your symptoms to the point where you won't be able to enjoy this." "I'll be fine, Mom," he replied with a wide grin. "Now stop worrying." His mother pursed her lips and shook her head, but she couldn't help smiling at her son's joyfulness. Unsurprisingly, the beginning of the tour did not disappoint. Wilder got a thrill from flying in the small aircraft. Wrapped in the metal cocoon, he found the rhythmic pulsing of the rotor blades oddly soothing. Halfway through the flight, the tour guide announced that they were entering the area over the Kilauea Point National Wildlife Refuge. As he began talking about the various local wildlife, the pilot nudged him and motioned toward a flock of birds in the distance. The tour guide looked at the pilot, shook his head, and shrugged. Then he turned around to face Wilder and his mother and said, "The birds you see flying up ahead to our left and right are called nenes. They're Hawaiian geese, not too dissimilar from Canadian geese. The largest exception being that you normally find these geese on the ground nesting and foraging for food." He smiled. "Consider it your lucky day. It's quite rare to see them flying, especially this many of them." The geese continued to close the gap, with the flocks gliding closer together. "We'll just fly a little higher and give them plenty of safe distance," the pilot calmly announced as he adjusted the cyclic stick to lift the nose of the helicopter. When the geese flew higher to match them, a strange feeling bubbled in Wilder's gut. After the tour guide turned uncertainly toward the pilot, Wilder exchanged a worried glance with his mother. They approached the nenes quickly now, and Wilder's heart pounded. His eyes widened as he looked from his birds to his mother, back to the birds again. Suddenly, the nose of the helicopter dipped low as the pilot quickly adjusted the stick again, but the steep angle caused him to lose control, and they plummeted toward the peninsula below. The helicopter twisted and turned, and Wilder couldn't tell through the utter chaos what was up or down. The pilot shouted, "Mayday, mayday, mayday," into his headset while he wrestled with the cyclic stick, and Wilder could hear the tour guide repeating, "Oh God," over and over. "Wilder!" His mother's panic cry grabbed at him, and he turned to see the horror in her eyes. As they reached toward each other, darkness swallowed Wilder whole. Thus ends chapter 1. Chapter 2. Wilder assumed he was dead until slowly waking to find he'd been thrown far from the helicopter. The oppressive heat from the burning wreckage washed over him, even at more than 100 feet away. Wilder called out for his mother. Hearing nothing in response, he crawled toward the crash. The heat worsened with every foot closer he clambered, becoming almost unbearable. Wilder felt an overwhelming urgency to get to his mother, so he pushed and clawed his way through the scorching oxygen-deprived air. Not long after that, he stopped, trembling, his eyes full of dread. Wilder had finally gotten close enough to see what he feared most. His mother's mangled body and outstretched arms lay ahead as her lifeless eyes stared back at him. Wilder screamed out, "No! Mom! Not you! I can't lose you! Mom!" Alternating between sobbing and choking on the stifling heat, he repeated the same thing. "It should have been me, not you. It should have been me, not you. It should have been me, not you." Eventually, when he had nothing left, Wilder rolled onto his back and slowly opened his crusty, stinging eyes. He noticed something in the sky above him, but couldn't quite make it out. Wilder tried blinking the remaining tears away. A dark cloud? Wait, is it swirling? What is that? He wiped his eyes and looked again. It wasn't a black cloud at all, but rather the Nenes circling above. It felt eerie, not the least bit natural. They circled faster and faster as they sank closer to him. Wilder didn't move. He didn't care anymore. What would I do without her? How could I possibly go on now? Wilder closed his eyes and waited. He soon felt a wild vortex of wind and assumed the end was near. He sucked in a deep breath and welcomed oblivion. Everything calmed, and Wilder once again assumed he was dead. Tentatively opening his eyes, he lifted his head to find himself lying on hard-packed dirt in the center of a ring of gigantic stone columns. The stones must have been at least 10 feet tall, 4 feet wide, and 2 feet thick. Without any thought, Wilder started counting them. When he turned to tally the ones behind him, he saw someone walking toward him. Still in a haze, he painstakingly sat up and pivoted to face the man. As Wilder waited for the stranger to close the distance, it dawned on him. No sign of the helicopter wreckage. Who are you and where am I? Wilder asked, his voice scratchy and hoarse. The man smiled warmly. My name is Talon Coyle. Welcome to Hiraeth, he said, making a sweeping hand gesture. Wilder shifted his eyes, glancing behind the stranger. He didn't have the energy to move. Is Hiraeth just another name for heaven or something? Am I dead? Talon shook his head. No, you are not dead. Hiraeth is a land, another world or realm, if you will, that looks and feels very similar to your Earth, but you'll find things work differently here. Looking down at the ground, Wilder mumbled, so I am dead. He huffed and raised his eyes to meet the stranger. What happened then? The man offered a sympathetic smile. This won't make much sense to you yet, but the simplest answer is you were going to die in that crash, so I used my magic to pull you from the helicopter just before impact. Then I opened a portal a while later and brought you here. This has to be a dream, a nightmare or something, Wilder chuckled humorously. He squeezed his eyes shut tight and pinched himself, hoping to wake up. When he reopened them, nothing had changed. Wilder looked up at the man. You're right, that makes no sense. Are you a figment of my imagination or something, maybe caused by the trauma of the crash as a way to help me cope with what happened? I can see how you might think that, but I assure you I'm not part of a dream or your imagination, Talon declared. Deciding to humor him, Wilder nodded. Okay, I'll bite. Let's say I'm not hallucinating right now and you did magically save me. Why? Why me? Talon lowered himself to the ground and sat cross-legged. That's quite a long story, and I think it's best to keep it as general and brief as possible for now. So why you? Well, as incredible as it may sound, you are extremely important to our world, and I did what I could to ensure your survival. Wilder laughed and rubbed his face. I must be losing my mind, he mumbled before raising his voice. I think incredible is a bit of an understatement. Improbable, unbelievable, ludicrous even. He paused, trying to shake the frustration. So you're telling me the helicopter crash really happened? Yes. After swallowing the rising bile, Wilder hesitantly asked, and my mom actually died? Yes, Talon replied solemnly. Wilder moved his head back and forth as his anger swelled. If you do have this magic you claim, why the hell wouldn't you save my mom, he seethed. If you saved me, you could have saved her too. She was right next to me. Talon tried to console him. I understand how you must be feeling, and I'm truly sorry for your loss. You're sorry? Wilder spat. Thank you for that. I feel so much better now. She was my mother. How could you possibly understand? She was the only parent I had. He felt himself teetering on sanity's edge, and his roiling fury threatened to shatter what little remained. Talon waited for Wilder's rage to fade, if only slightly, before responding. That's fair. Unfortunately, there was only enough magic to try to save you. Regardless of what you're feeling right now, you must understand how important you are. Wilder grumbled as he turned to stare blankly off to the side. Realizing Wilder needed to hear some good news, Talon offered the only thing he could. Regarding your mother being your only parent, that's not quite accurate. What do you mean? Wilder snapped his head forward to look at Talon. Your father is alive. What? Wilder barked, his eyes wide with shock. He's alive? Talon's face brightened. Connor is in Hiraeth. He came here a long time ago, just after your birth. My father? Here? I don't understand. Wilder's head spun. Why would he leave my mom to come here? He squawked. Why would he leave me? He didn't even give our family a chance. Talon sighed. I suppose I need to explain everything. But as I said, it will take some time, so why don't you follow me to my home where we can sit more comfortably? It's just through the woods over there, he said, pointing toward a grove of trees past the tall stones. How do I know I can trust you? Wilder asked with narrowed eyes. Talon stood, stepped close to Wilder, and offered his hand. You don't. But you are all alone in a world you do not know. Eventually, you will have to take a chance and trust someone, so why not me? As he measured Talon, Wilder didn't see anything other than wisdom and kindness staring back at him through aquamarine eyes. Recognizing the man also made a sensible point, Wilder grabbed his hand and hoisted himself off the ground. I thought I died in that crash, Wilder shrugged. Quite frankly, I'm still not 100% sure I didn't. But I suppose I've got nothing to lose at this point, so I might as well hear you out. Lead the way, he said, gesturing toward the trees. Following slightly behind and to the side, Wilder studied Talon. At approximately 6 feet tall, he stood an inch or two shorter than Wilder. Likely in his mid-50s, Talon was on the thinner side and donned gray, medium-length hair and suntanned skin. Wilder sensed the strength in the man that belied his size, and he couldn't help wondering if Talon's supposed magic had anything to do with it. Wilder took everything in. The sun shining brightly despite clouds covering half the sky made it comfortably warm, and based on the sun's position, he estimated it to be early afternoon. When they entered the tree line behind the ring of stones, Wilder took a deep breath and knew he'd walked into a grove of cedars. Except he had never seen them so massive. The trunks were thick, many twisted, as the evergreens stretched high above, some possibly as high as 200 feet. It seems like Earth to me, Wilder muttered. Though Talon said nothing, Wilder saw the corner of the man's mouth curve upward. They stepped out from underneath the tall canopy of green needles a few minutes later. A modest log cabin lay just ahead, no doubt built from the surrounding cedars. Chickens roamed free while several horses grazed in a paddock attached to a stable, adding to the rather idyllic scene. Talon smiled. I know it's not much, but it's enough for me. It's home. It looks nice, Wilder said frankly. Nodding, Talon motioned toward the front door. Please join me inside. I believe my companions should have some tea and biscuits prepared. Wilder's eyes widened and he stopped in his tracks. Talon tried to ease his apprehension. You already decided to trust me, so you can trust them too. They will help me explain everything. They're on your side and just so happen to possess some very special and useful skills. Come, let me introduce you. Wilder hesitated as Talon continued toward the front door. He briefly grappled with the idea of hightailing it out of there, but Wilder had no idea where he was or where he would even go. Shit, he murmured. I've come this far, so what's the difference? Wilder shook his head and stalked after Talon. So that's the first two chapters.
Yeah, I was muted.
Oh, that's fine.
I always mute myself when the reading's going on so that I don't, I don't accidentally like interrupt. But that was wild. So he lost his mother in the first chapter, lost his world, then gained a father, met someone really strange to find out that, oh yeah, I brought you here, but not your mom. That's a lot to take in. Like that's wow.
Yeah, and he's not done freaking out yet.
No, I don't think so.
No.
So why did the dad go to Hiraeth? What?
So, and I'm probably not spoiling a whole lot. I mean, if you read the back cover, you'll understand that the prophecy involved and stuff. So, what happened was essentially Talon has a mentor, Kendry Gray, and he's a seer, and he had, I think it was, I forget how many I had said, but essentially like 200 years earlier, I think it had been, like 3 seers removed from Kendry. They were shown a prophecy about, I guess I could read the actual, prophecy here. Let me see.
Let's hear it in the prophet's own words.
Yeah. Let me find that one. So get the exact wording here. Okay.
Your character's gonna be mad you don't have it memorized.
They might be that. Okay, here we go. Born of green flame, a beacon of hope will come forth in a time of great need. This little king with the heart of a phoenix stands as the last bastion of defense against the return of terror that will once again plague this land.
Okay, let's break down the prophecy. So what does born of green flame mean?
That's a good question.
Okay, what's the answer?
I won't be giving much away, but essentially, because you find out very early in the book. So there's a whole lot of other stuff. The first few chapters are basically Wilder. He meets Talon, obviously, and then there are two more, Ethan and Iris, who he becomes really good friends with. They're in there waiting, and they also have magic, and they went to Earth with Talon, and they're the ones that together they all saved Wilder. But as far as the prophecy goes, Talon's mentor Kendry, again, it was passed down through seers, so he learned of the prophecy, and they didn't write it down, they didn't tell anyone, they only spoke of it and passed it down orally. So he knew of the prophecy for a long time, but they couldn't figure out the riddle until Kendry happened to be, and there are 4 kingdoms in this world too. They're in Thairn right now. Connor actually who's Wilder's father, was born in another one of the kingdoms, Venleros, but he only lived there for a month, and his parents ended up taking him to Earth.
How do people just go to Earth? Is there like a portal? So does everybody just, think?
No. So there's only, you can only go between worlds through special portals. And where he arrived from Earth in that stone circle is one of those.
Okay. So you have to go to the portal to go to Earth. So do people often go from Hiraeth to Earth, or
no? Okay. It's very rare. In fact,
it seems like a lot of characters are doing this.
Only people with the
Oh, I think his characters are mad that he didn't memorize the prophecy. They put a spell on him and he is frozen again. So we'll just hang tight until he unfreezes.
Cut out again.
Yeah, no, okay. Your characters are taking revenge. I was just telling listeners.
I know. They did not want me to give anything away.
They took offense that you don't have the prophecy memorized.
I know. I'm being punished. But yeah, so only certain people can. And Kendry and Talon are 2 of them. Talon actually has portal magic, but there are limits to his. So he can only, he has to really kind of sort of fill his magical well over time. And, he can, if he sits down and meditates and really builds it up, it'll take him a while to be able to open one. It'll take him a lot longer to open a couple of them. Like the most he's ever opened is a few in succession. So there are limits to it. But anyway, in this magical stone circle, there's a lot more power because it has its own magic, and that one allows you to open portals to other realms. So Kendry's mentor had already shown him Earth before. He's visited there, all of that kind of stuff. So when Kendry had found out that there was he was in this other kingdom, Venleros, and he found out a baby was born with bright green eyes. And so that kind of popped his curiosity a bit. And then when he found out,
how do you find out about things that are happening on another world?
Well, no. This is before all of that. So this is when Connor Wilder's father was first born.
Oh, okay.
In Venleros, because he was born there.
Oh, okay. So okay, that's a little bit okay. So we're on the same world. So there's not like an intra-worlds
no.
gossip network. Like, hey, did you hear about the baby with green eyes? You might want to check that out. If you got any prophecy.
No, and obviously there's enough people born with green eyes, right? But I know it's rare, but it's not that rare.
That'd be kind of wild if they went and checked up on all the green eyed kids. Like, no, wait. How do we tell if they're the prophesied one again?
Right. And again, as prophecies work, right? They've got to come to fruition in one way, shape, or form. So
you can't escape it. So
they
don't really have to look for the chosen one, because the chosen one can't escape their destiny. They're eventually going to show up somehow.
Yeah, I know. I still believe in like the free will, and they've got to prove their metal and decide what they want to do. But
I totally I'm with you on that. I write about the chosen one. It's one of my favorite. I love the trope and I hate the trope, but I
know. I feel the
chosen one. He doesn't know he's the chosen one. They can't tell him, because if he ever finds out, he can't break the curse. Like that's how that's how curses work in my world. If you don't know about it, you can escape it. Once you know about it, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy and you can't escape it.
Right. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So he's the chosen one, but he doesn't know he's the chosen one, and like they can't tell him. So they're like waiting for him to do the chosen one thing, but since they can't tell him, he doesn't know that he needs to be doing things. So there's a hilarious thing that they're just
That's
like,
good.
come on, do the thing. And
Right,
he's just like,
yeah.
no, I'm gonna go over here. I
Yeah.
have no idea why you're staring
Yeah,
at
I don't
me.
know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Well, she's a giant tree. She's a giant she's a giant tree that talks, and she doesn't
Oh,
talk to
like Ent, like the
yeah,
Ents a
like
little bit.
that. It's like if Galadriel was an Ent,
Okay. Okay.
like
Oh,
that
nice. Yeah.
kind of gravitas and power. She
Yeah.
doesn't talk to people all that often because like she's so much beyond actual
Okay.
people. Like if she needs you to do something, then maybe she'll speak to you, but
Okay.
or maybe not. I mean, she's a
Yeah.
magical tree. She's not human, so
Right.
we don't know what she's thinking.
Yeah. Much different energy.
Yeah, she doesn't have facial features or anything. She is just a giant glowing tree.
Right. Okay. That's
Yeah.
cool.
Anyway, we got off topic, but
Yeah, that's
I
fine.
like the chosen one thing. So let's
Yeah.
get back to your chosen one thing. So we're looking
Okay.
for. So he hears about Connor, which is Wilder's father, who's got green eyes, and goes to check it
Right.
out. Is there like a checklist for Are you the chosen one?
Well, so the interesting thing was as he sort of injects himself into the locals' conversation, you know, gushing about this baby with green eyes and whatnot, he finds out the surname of the family, which is Rygon, and that in fact means little king. So Kendry, being the knowledge buff that he is, he happened to have already known that. So that's what started him going, okay, we might be onto something here. We got Green Flame and Little King. So he ends up going to Connor's parents' house and introducing him and himself, and just, you know, he's an older gentleman, so he just like, yeah, I heard and wanted to come by and check it out. and once he learned all that and he saw the baby's eyes, he knew. So he actually then hurries back to his home kingdom, Thairn, and tells Talon about it. And he's trying to figure out what they want to do, how to protect this child, because they know if, you know, just by him being born, if he is, in fact, you know, he had a good feeling he was it. And if that means Abaddon's coming back soon. So,
So wait, why does him being born mean that Abaddon is coming back soon? Is he like locked out, and this child being born lets him back in?
No, not for that. So there were some other things that Abaddon had set in motion before the Phoenixes departed. He had sworn the kingdom of Thalden's king at the time to allegiance, and actually they were given the kingdom. Then they weren't king at the time, but they were given the kingdom, and they had specific tasks that they were going to have to do in the event of his return. They didn't know when that would be, so that had to fall all the way through the line, and so the kings would pass it on to the next king on what their duties were. So they already understood that there was a good chance that Abaddon would come back. You know, some people thought the Phoenixes killed him, but they never found him. The mountain base that he was in had collapsed and everything like that, but there was no sign of him. So Abaddon being ancient and powerful in magic, you know, you have to figure there's a good chance that he survived, and they assumed that this prophecy was in regards to him because the return of terror. So just sort of piecing all those things together. And then, so after the Connor incident, he remembered his mentor taking him to Earth one time, the Kendry. And so he decides the best place to do it is if he can convince Connor's parents, is to get them to go to Earth. So that if Abaddon does come back, he won't be able to find him. And
so how does that, like, you go from a medieval type world to Earth where we've got helicopters and planes?
Yeah.
Like how like they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna go, hello modern conveniences, and like how do you like that I can't, like, that's kind of wild. Like, how do you go from a medieval tech level, like magical world to Earth and not have extreme culture shock and grow up like at all? Like, I mean, I'm assuming Connor went when he was a baby, but his parents had to like you find work, and can you talk a little about that? Because that's just like, how do you do that and survive in our very modern world that is so different when you know nothing about it?
Yeah. So
or speak the language.
Yeah, and while I don't address that specifically in the book, I do have a conversation between Wilder and the other two, Ethan and Iris, that where they're comparing the differences between Hiraeth and Earth. And the interesting thing is essentially they came to the conclusion that it's basically the same. The only difference is you substitute magic for like modern technology. Modern technology is basically, to them, it seems like a form of magic. They have people in Hiraeth with portal magic. They get you to one place to another. We have planes and whatever else.
I think they've got the better mode of transportation. Just to be honest,
yes, I agree.
We
I
have
would
to
prefer
spend,
portal.
yeah. There's no spending hours on a plane. You
Yeah.
don't have to worry about if they're serving food on it or not, or where you're going to put your luggage.
Right.
Or
Yeah, I
yeah.
prefer that. Even
Are you ever going to do like some kind of like novella or short story about like that piece, like them, like Connor being born and them like leaving in Hiraeth and going to Earth and attempting to survive? Like, so like, I mean, because that sounds to me like an adventure in itself,
yeah.
and worrying that could Abaddon or any of his associates, hangers on, followers, whatever, have followed them, have sensed that they did this. Does he have anybody in Earth that might be looking for that? Like that could be just that sounds like a really interesting tale.
Yeah, I've thought of a couple of possible novellas or spin-off type of thing that could cover a couple of different things. Another one too is King Zane is a very interesting character that you start to get to know in book one. He's probably my favorite character writing about, even though he's secondary. But I've thought about doing a whole thing for him as well. But yeah, that could be something that I could do. I have some thoughts on that as well. It also helped that Kendry had spent a decent amount of time there before, so he knows a little bit more about Earth and how to navigate it. And he would have certainly helped his parents get settled there at least. I also used so they ended up going to Arizona, and that there's I don't know how much you know about like the ley lines and all of that stuff, but Arizona's got a lot of energetic kind of things there, so I use that as just outside Sedona there. They're known for that, so that's where Connor kind of grew up, and then so being in Arizona, I think they weren't, again, they would have lived outside of the city and not really a part of it, so they could have integrated a lot slower. And then eventually they had to tell Connor the truth too. So when he, as he kind of came of age, they told him the truth about his destiny, and to keep him even safe, just because they were afraid Abaddon could track them down. Especially they weren't entirely sure how much, how powerful his magic was. They just knew from the old stories in the books that had been written about him, that he was quite powerful. But they didn't. He had a knack for always finding out anything he needed to find out, and they thought he had they had some assumptions that he might have had some mind magic, much like the Phoenixes do. So the Phoenixes have fire and mind magic. They can speak to your mind, and the powerful ones could even control their minds, control others' mind if you're not strong enough.
So are these Phoenixes, since you just brought them up?
Yeah.
I'm dying to know. So are they like protectors? Are they like, what role do they play in Hiraeth?
Yeah, so they were actually, and this is another one I thought about doing since we're on the topic, but the Phoenixes themselves, I also thought about doing a whole thing around Abaddon's first go round here, and then the Phoenixes would play a much greater role. But yeah, the Phoenixes are ancient. They were there. They were the first ones in Hiraeth, essentially, and then as the people came, they sort of moved away from the mainlands. just to give them space, because you know how people are, they get a little too curious and power hungry. So they kind of moved out and largely stayed out of humans' business, unless they really needed to. Like, they interacted with some people. They had interacted, like the oldest of the phoenixes, Ragnall, had interacted with the original seer who saw the prophecy about the green flame like 200 years earlier, and then they sort of disappeared. Like, nobody's seen the phoenixes and since that last time, like 200 years earlier. So they're really kind of staying out, and nobody knows what's going on, especially when Abaddon comes back, because they haven't shown up yet. So
Oh wow.
I don't
So they're
want to
just
give too much more
yeah,
away about
so
that.
they're just magical beings who live in this world, and they have a
Yeah,
beef with Abaddon, or he has a beef with them.
yeah, and they're large. Like, I described it to Wilder in the book, that essentially they're like the size of, like, 3 times the size of an ostrich, kind of thing. So they're huge. Obviously they have fire magic and mind magic. So I've always been fascinated with phoenixes. There's many different takes on them, but I just kind of like that one. So
No, they're definitely a fascinating creature.
yeah,
All right, so getting back to Connor, so he grew
yeah,
up on Earth, and then at some point he decided to go back. So it sounds like he went back after Wilder was born, but I guess Wilder was still very young. And what decided him to go back?
yeah. So um, when Connor left Arizona, and again, his parents wanted him to move away, just to keep him even safer, and they stayed by the portal in Arizona.
Is that
Just
the
in,
only portal, the one in Arizona to our world, or were there other ones?
no, that's the only one
That's the only one.
that they came through, at least from this portal. Now, Abaddon is something different, but as far as the people of Hiraeth go, like, this is the only one they.
Okay, so that makes
Yeah,
sense then. Going anywhere else in the world would get you further away from it and make you
yep,
safer.
yeah. So yeah, so he ends up going to Georgia, outside Atlanta, and he ends up meeting Wilder's mother, Emma, and they end up obviously madly in love. They get married, and then a couple years later, they have Wilder. So they're in the hospital room. Connor looks down. Well, as obviously Emma gets to hold Wilder first, so she's holding him, and then she gives him to Connor, and he grabs him and looks down, and that's when he knew, because the one thing about Connor's eyes is while they were green, they had little flecks of gold in them too. But the difference was they weren't as noticeable when he was a newborn, but Wilder's were. It was like he knew his whole world got shattered. He was unbelievably excited for this child, and then he looks down and sees that he's like, it's not me, it's Wilder. Wilder's the one. So he does the unthinkable, and he he's kind of crying, and Emma sees that something's off and starts to ask him about it, but then Wilder's crying and needs to be fed and that kind of stuff and comforted. So Emma takes him, and then she's exhausted, ends up going to sleep, and then he leaves. He heads directly back to Arizona and comes back through the portal, which Kendry had taught his parents how to open the portal. And it's the interesting thing I kind of put in there was that anyone can open a portal back to their home world, because it's sort of the universe's way of always letting you go home.
That's nice. That's a nice feature.
Yeah. So they showed Connor how to open it if he ever needed to, like if they had died or whatever and something happened, he needed to go. So they showed him. So he doesn't even tell his parents. Connor just goes, he leaves the hospital right then, drives out to Arizona, and immediately comes back to Hiraeth, and then finds, he knew based on what his parents had told him that Kendry had lived nearby the circle. So he found Talen's house. They both lived nearby. So he found Talen's house, who was home at the time Kendry was it, And so Talon, Connor comes in, and Talon wasn't sure at first who it was, but he had a feeling because he was looking for Kendry and all that. So then he realizes something's wrong, and then Connor ends up basically telling them that he left because he wants, in order to protect his son, he's going to be the decoy. He wanted to come to Hiraeth, so if Abaddon returned, that Abaddon would come after him, because they were pretty sure that one way or another Abaddon was going to find out about the prophecy either way. So he basically wanted to set everything up so that Abaddon would come after him.
I see.
So that's why he's there.
So were they like watching over Wilder from afar? They have people like just in Georgia, just keeping an eye on things, and
yeah.
in case Abaddon sent some of his people looking around the U.S. and realized that he'd been duped.
Yeah. So Kendry had some people he had set up after he converses with Connor about it. And at first they tried to convince Connor to go back because they're like, hey, go protect your child there.
Yeah.
But he was adamant. He said, no, I'm staying here because I can, as much as I'd love to go back, I can protect him here because I can at least, you guys thought I was the prophesied one, right? So I can, if I fooled everyone else, I can fool Abaddon. So, but yeah, they kept an eye on him. And then eventually what they started doing is basically they would move around. So every couple of years they would just move around, and they'd spend, like Connor would spend several days in like one place just being seen, right? Mm-hmm. And so they did this all over the Four Kingdoms, so that when Abaddon did come back, there would be so many reports of seeing this person once he figured out who they were looking for, that they wouldn't know where to look. They'd have to look everywhere.
So what happens to, now you said Wilder had like really bad MS, and it's difficulty like doing a lot of things. So after the helicopter crash, like, and then he goes to Hiraeth, like what happens with that? Because I mean, the helicopter crash is obviously, I mean, it killed his mother and it killed a lot of other people, and that would obviously like cause some damage, and he's already dealing with this physical ailment. So like what happens with that? Is it because
this one I also had kind of planned from the get-go, but essentially because Wilder belongs on Hiraeth, something was off on Earth, which is why he had gotten MS. His bloodline does not belong there.
So it's like an allergic reaction to Earth?
Kind of, sort of, right? His energy isn't like there's something off because he doesn't really belong there. And so he has that. But when he comes back to Hiraeth, then at first he doesn't believe it, but but he has no more symptoms, and he feels like right away he starts feeling stronger than he has in years, because he's been dealing with MS for about 4 years, like basically all throughout high school, and it got really bad during the last year. So, and again, as it's tied to sort of all this prophecy stuff, it's building up and getting worse right as Abaddon's getting ready to return, because Abaddon returned, actually returned twice. He returned 15 years earlier, so Wilder would have been about 3. He returned to retrieve something that he had in Hiraeth that he needed, to something he was building and making with his magic to hopefully destroy the Phoenixes, the one thing he couldn't do the first time around.
And like nobody noticed that he like came back? And
no, they did. So everyone knew, because when he came back, and also the other thing about Abaddon is he only travels through protected portals, and he needs these tall, they're like a foot tall black stones, and there's it actually has, like, the way I describe them is basically they're heavier than what you'd think they are, about a foot tall, and I think like 4 inches wide or something like that. But it's filled with, basically when you hold it, like you can feel it sort of thrumming, and there's like, if you really look closely, it almost looks like black fog is kind of swirling in there. So
So
he
they're
had,
like special stones.
yeah, they're special stones from his home world, and he had sent them through with some of his, just some slaves of his, that he made go through. He opened a portal, sent them through with the stones to bring there, and then because the king of Falden had to, they were the ones that swore allegiance to him, and that was one of their tasks, and so they had to then build this portal with those stones, and he comes through that then
I
once
see.
the portal's protected.
So
So
when he
he,
was so when he left, he went back to his world, and now he's
yes,
coming
yeah,
back. I
yeah,
see.
yeah. So he comes back to grab a couple of things, and he and obviously interacts with, the actually Zane's, King Zane ends up being, Zane Draven. He's the king of Falden for most of the book, but his father Anders starts off as king, and he was there the first time Abaddon came through, like the 15 years ago. Um, and then he gets sick and dies, and so Zane then becomes king, and so there's an interaction there, and Zane's young, and so I'm kind of setting things up that way. But they interact. Abaddon gets some things, goes back, and then he comes back, right just before, I think. Well, I guess about a year earlier, I think it was, from when Wilder ends up going to Hiraeth, because he comes back, learns about the prophecy, starts looking for Connor, has all the Falden, King Zane, or well, it was Anders that, or no, King Zane now, getting ahead of myself. King Zane and all of his soldiers are looking for, Connor, and they end up capturing Connor then. But Abaddon is not fooled, immediately sees the gold flakes and doesn't say anything about it, but then he realizes there's something to it, so he ends up finding out then that, Connor had a son. His name was Wilder, and he was going to go to Earth to kill him. So Abaddon then, he had essentially, um, opened a portal to Hawaii, Kauai at the time, and he did not go through. He used a piece of magic that he's got, a doppelganger spell. So he sent a version of himself that he could communicate with, essentially, and use some magic with. So he ends up spelling the birds, the nenes that ended up causing a helicopter crash. And then his doppelganger ends up, inspecting the crash, seeing Wilder dead, and they only saw Wilder dead because of Ethan, who, has, illusion magic,
Mm-hmm.
and he ends up. It, I won't say too much about it, because I think the story is fascinating about how, Iris and Ethan and Talon all kind of combine to save Wilder, but, there's an illusion involved, and that fools Abaddon's doppelganger enough that he believes Wilder is dead, at least for a
That
time.
explains why we had to do the helicopter crash, because
Yeah,
they needed Abaddon to think he was dead.
yeah,
And that's a good way to do it. I mean,
yeah, yeah. So
I hope they tell Wilder this at some
they
point.
do. No,
Like, no,
they do in the first
we
few
weren't
chapters.
trying to kill you. We were trying to make sure that Abaddon thought you were dead.
Yeah,
We're sorry we had to kill other people in the process, but it had to look real.
yeah. The first, like, I think 7 chapters are all basically, as after the first two, he goes into Talon's house, he meets Iris and Ethan, and they all kind of tell him, although he does run out because he's so kind of freaked out about it, and
Yeah, I
he
would be
ran
too.
out, and he ends up passing out, and has sort of this beautiful dream with his mother, almost like a visitation kind of thing, um, where she visits him, and they talk, and it's, I made my wife cry at this chapter, which I'm very proud of.
What an
So
accomplishment.
I know, any emotion's good. So so I made her cry at that one, but it really, this kind of heartfelt moment of him seeing.
Oh, and the characters must be upset at you, Peter, because you've frozen again. So we'll just chill here until the characters release him from bondage. Oh, maybe they're not going to release him.
Happened again.
Oh yeah, I was just saying that your characters must be upset at you because you're
They are.
frozen again.
I'm giving too much away, but
It's like
yeah.
it's now strategic. You start talking and like they don't even let you get the sentence out before you're like they just like nope, nope, nope. We're
I
gonna fiddle
know.
with the Wi-Fi. We're gonna take you out before you can give
Oh,
away the goods.
it's impressive too because I am on full bars and running at 1200
But
megs.
it's every time you're about to say something too. Like it's eerie.
Yeah,
It's you know,
that's funny.
or you
Yeah,
got a ghost
so
in the house who's like, hey.
it could be the ghost of Wilder's mother. Yes. But yeah,
Yeah.
so they have this awesome heartfelt moment, sort of in a dream after he just passes out, and she kind of helps him a little bit too. Um, but yeah, so I'm not giving too much away because all of that gets told. They explain everything, how they did it, and their magic and all that kind of stuff early on. So
No, this is awesome. So, how many books are out in the series right now?
I've got two out. The other one I'm only probably 20 to 25% through on book three, so that'll probably be early next year, I guess.
So, you said at the beginning of this interview that you originally conceived this to be a 7-book series. Now that
Mhm.
you're 3 books into the writing of it, are the characters going to let you end after 7 books, or are you going to be like me and like there have been quite a few other fantasy authors on here who we started writing something, oh yeah, it'll be a few books, and you
Well,
know, and it starts to expand and you're like, oh wait, there's this I could tell and there's that I could tell and we
yeah,
didn't explore this and I want to know more about that.
yeah.
So
I think, yeah, originally I was like, I wasn't sure, like way back when I wasn't sure between 5 and 7. I like the odd numbered series for some reason. But then as I started getting going and kind of outlining what I wanted to do in each book, I was like, yeah, this is going to be 7. So the first three really tell, sort of, really the first three is half the series, because book 4 now is going to be essentially a flashback book for Zane's, King Zane's past, his whole history. Like I said, he's my favorite character. He's going to get a whole book,
nice.
like right
And
in the middle, because it's gonna make sense, between books 3 and 5, that I kind of write that because there's so much that about him that would be missed. So
yeah. And then
um,
I guess 5 through 7 is we're doing something else, I guess.
well, yeah, it'll be the second half, um, of it, but I think it makes a lot of sense to have sort of this hiatus. You can't call it a prequel, really, but it'll be, because it'll have a little bit of what's going on, sort of in current chronological order,
Hmm.
but the bulk of it will be a flashback book to tell Zane's story. So
That's cool. That's very cool. So we'll look for that in maybe 2024.
yeah, probably. Yeah, best case scenario would be end of 2023, but yeah, probably 2024.
Cool. Very
So
cool. And do you have any plans for what you're going to write after this series, or
no, nothing yet. I
if these characters release you from bondage is the big question.
right, right, yeah. I really don't know. I'd love the fantasy genre, so it would be somewhere in there. I just don't know if I would go, you know, more. Yeah, I could see myself going more humorous or darker. This is sort of the middle of the road. It's not, it's not going to be overly dark. It's not going to be, too, it's your typical, I guess.
Oh, the characters are apparently objecting to you leaving their world. They've frozen him again. So maybe Peter won't be leaving the world of Hiraeth anytime soon. We'll see what.
Apparently, I'm not going to write anything.
Yeah, that's what I was just saying. Is apparently your characters have spoken.
Yeah,
They have decided that you're never leaving the world of
right.
Hiraeth. They have many more stories for you to tell. They just haven't. They haven't sent you the memo yet. So
Just
expect
kidding.
that.
I guess I'm going to write all my spin-offs.
And they're gonna have spin-offs.
Right. Yeah.
That's
I
the way
guess
it
I'll have to
goes.
go to. I guess I'll have to start with Abaddon's and the Phoenixes, maybe 2,000 years ago.
And Connor's parents, because that's
Yeah.
wild. That's
Yeah.
got to be wild. I think that would be a very cool story to tell.
Yeah. It
But yeah,
definitely is cool to blend the two. You know, especially from like what you were talking about, where
I just want to see
you're
the
coming from
struggle.
this world.
Like,
Yeah.
even though you can think of technology as being very advanced magic, but then like to
Yeah.
interact with it is a completely different thing.
Right. Yeah. And again, if you're going real time, so they would have essentially come here in early 2000s.
Yeah,
So yeah,
that's
at
a
least,
jump.
yeah, it's a pretty good jump. I mean, it's not as crazy maybe as it is now, but it was still pretty. Yeah.
But you could find some like interesting portion, like maybe they were with a traveling Renaissance fair, where even though it's all, I mean, you could find
Right.
interesting
You're
things,
like,
like, or
these
maybe
guys
they
are
joined
so
Cirque du
good at the
Soleil,
medieval.
yeah,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
like, or some theater troupe, or like maybe they found some. That's why I think it'd be an interesting story to tell, because you could find some interesting corner of our world that they might feel comfortable in, and that's what I'm like curious
Yeah.
about, like
Yeah. No,
what, like
that's
what
a
did
cool idea.
yeah, like, because that's and how do you make friends? And like, you can't answer where did you come from, or like you did where'd you go to
Right.
like, there's so many questions you can't answer.
Yeah.
And like,
Yeah. We're
how did they learn English? Because
yeah.
like, there's no like, idiot's guide to the translation between their language on Hiraeth and modern English.
Yeah. Right.
Like, I have so many questions. Like, I think that could be a really like interesting story.
Yeah, no, that you're right. That would be pretty fascinating. There is some good, they'd almost have to be like sort of I don't know, traveling gypsies, right?
Yeah.
That way they can explain it can explain them not having gone to school anywhere, or I
I
would
think that
think
would be
something like
hard to
that.
pull off, like, in the US. That's why I think it'd be a very
Yeah,
interesting story to tell. You'd have a lot of, like, very interesting challenges, and
yeah,
would they understand some, like, like, just even police and sirens and things, or would
yeah,
they be scared? And, like, just I think it could be very interesting.
yeah.
And
Oh, for sure. They'd have to stay far away from the big cities, though.
well, yeah,
Like,
but even, like, suburbia could be
right.
very, like, because I grew up in suburbia, and it is gadgets galore. Like, in the
Yeah,
city, you've got your small apartments, and yeah, people have gadgets, but when you live in suburbia and you have space, I mean,
right.
the IKEA exists for a reason.
Right.
It's I think that could be very like I'm saying,
Yeah,
I'm
no,
just
that's
playing
cool.
the
No,
idea because I think you could do a lot of really interesting stuff with that, and like, and Connor growing up straddling that, his parents are, and he wouldn't know, and like, there would be such a like a gap, because
yeah,
he
no,
would
I
grow
think
up
that
as
would,
a normal kid, and like that could just create a lot of interesting things, especially if they're on the run and scared and like don't know if
yeah,
Abaddon's, and it would be interesting if like you could even have run-ins with his people and stuff, or
right.
close calls. Like there could be just some very interesting stuff with that.
Yeah, I think that would make for a really cool novella. Yeah, you're
It
right.
would. I hope you do it
I,
because
yeah, I wouldn't have to do like a spin-off. Like if I do the Abaddon 2,000 years ago, like that would have to be like a spin-off, trilogy or something like
that should
that.
probably
But
be its own trilogy. It sounds like
yeah,
there's a lot of really cool stuff, especially like with the phoenixes and stuff. And like we still don't know exactly what Abaddon is. You've been skirting around that,
yeah,
so that could
it's
be very interesting. Like, did he was he born over 2,000 years ago, or was he alive even longer than that? Like,
no,
there's some very
he's been alive longer than that. I address that.
yeah,
I don't give the exact age, but
and the
he's
world he's
several thousand
from.
years.
Yeah, like the
Yeah,
world he's from. How did he find out about Hiraeth and Earth, and why did he want to take them over? Like, is there some more powerful? Is he
yeah,
dealing with like Sauron in his world? And he's like, yeah, I can't beat this dude. I'm gonna
right.
go find my own world to take over. Like, you could do a lot of really interesting stuff with that.
Yeah, I address a little bit about his world because especially because the Falden Kings have some questions, especially Zane's father, Anders, initially.
But does he
Um,
tell them the truth?
well, right, his world is so vastly different. Like what he tells Anders is basically like, if you guys came to my world, you would literally lose your minds. It would fraction into 1,000 pieces. It's like everything works so differently. The four creators were masters of time and space, and so
So
everything is
wait, how does
really,
Abaddon not lose his mind being in Hiraeth or in Earth? Because that's so totally different.
yeah.
Or did he? Or is that why he is the way he is? Did he lose his mind coming here, and did it drive him crazy?
He's experimented a lot with his own, like where he's from, with his own magic and understanding of time, and he's created some things that show up in the book that actually do mess with time a little bit. And so he's been able to perfect some things back in his world. And the creators that made his world have long been gone. They were actually gone before he was born. But how they created it, it just works so much differently in terms of all that. And it's an ancient world, so he's several thousand years old. He and another character that comes into play, which I won't say who, they were involved in a lot of sort of magical experimentation. And so they've sort of merged, different magical beings together and that kind of stuff. And so he's got several thousand years experience in a lot of this stuff. So he's and again, the black stones make a huge difference. Anyone who comes through, like all the slaves that he sent through that portal, before they, because they brought the stones with them, all of them lost their minds coming from his world. So that's sort of the protection, because they're magical stones from his world.
So they keep him from losing his mind?
Yeah. Because it's more about the travel through sort of time and space that you would lose it, not necessarily being in another world, but it's more the sort of the traversing between the two.
But he is slightly crazy if he wants to take over Hiraeth.
Well, yeah,
I mean, you have to be slightly nuts to want to conquer everything.
By definition, yes. I mean, any sort of tyrant and conqueror would have to be a little, little loose. So yeah, he's obviously looking for something different. He is very powerful. He's human. He's a human shape and everything, but obviously he's larger than most. But his stuff is all magic, and he doesn't trust anyone, so he doesn't tell. The other little thing that you kind of find out early on is he left somebody behind when he went back to his world, and this character has been busy while he's been away, so that kind of comes into it too, but I won't spill too much there.
Okay. Nope, this is sounding very interesting. So we'll have to wait for the trilogy about Abaddon, or maybe it'll be a 7-book series. We'll see what the characters decree.
Right, I know. We'll have to see, but yeah, that one I honestly had I felt like I probably would at some point. I just didn't know if I'd go directly from like this series to that, or if I'd do something else in between. But I always kind of figured I'd probably write that at some point.
Well, I think the characters have made their wishes very clear while we've been here. Before you could even talk about writing anything else, they stopped you. Oh, then they stopped you again. You started talking about doing something else. Well, this has been a lot of fun. Hopefully he'll come back. Hopefully the characters will let him continue this.
I don't know if I'm supposed to write it or not now.
They interrupted you again before you could talk about anything else.
I know.
They've got plans for you.
I know. I need to shut my mouth, I guess.
You need to have a sit-down chat with them and find out what those plans are, because clearly they've got the rest of your writing all figured out. And before you know it, you'll be like me with 5 series set in the same world.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I very well might be doing that. I guess I need to have a little, meditation or seance with them or something.
Something. They've been very vocal tonight.
Yeah, I'm listening.
Might want to take notes. It seems like they've got quite a few demands. But this has been fantastic. Is there anything else you want to say before we wrap? Because this has been great.
No, I just, if anyone listening, if you want to check it out, it would be awesome. I really love, truly, like any type of feedback. Always looking to grow with writing and stuff too. So, that's another thing with the Spiffbo that's been awesome, is just the other authors' feedback and stuff. So, it's great to get good reviews from friends and family, but I love like the honest, like, what did you really think?
It's great from total strangers, because there's no incentive to tell you nice things.
Yeah.
If they really like it, and you're like, yes, I did something right.
Yeah, and I have thick skin. It's okay. I've had, I've made many iterations here, so
Oh yeah,
But,
nothing's perfect, and we
yeah.
we know our our books are our babies, and we know that they
Yeah.
have warts. We try to fix as many as we can, but we're
Right.
also blind to them. We think they're all beautiful. So
I know. Yeah.
and everybody's personal taste is different. So, but thank
Yeah.
you so much. This has been Fantasy Lore and More. I am your indie fantasy author, Melinda Kucsera. This has been Peter Mooren, and we've been talking about the Return of Abaddon. So I'll have all the links down in the description or the show notes. So definitely check it out, and we'll be back with another interview soon. Thank you so much. Have a good night or a good day wherever you're at.
All right. Thank you.